Welcome to the Mega Evolution Pitch Black 3K recap. This is for the Gym Leader Challenge portion of the 3K run by Full Grip Games. Wanted to get my thoughts out about how that weekend went, the results, and the meta, which I think is very interesting. Kicking it off with the meta breakdown, just wanted to give a caveat that this meta breakdown might look a little different than the one shared by the tournament organizer, Natalie. Once we got the detailed list of all the deck lists and the cards that were played, it looked like Water had 2 additional decks than reported, while there was 1 less Psychic and 1 less Grass deck. But overall, we see that Fighting and Psychic are some of the top decks, and then we also see Colorless jump up to be the second most popular deck. I think I'm not too surprised with the Colorless jump, given Colorless has a very good matchup into Psychic, and the locals right before Mr. Tricky Jim himself had piloted a colorless deck to 6-0 finish, which had converted a lot of the local players to also play colorless. And I think some of them would have played Fighting if not colorless, so just playing colorless and moving off of Fighting really helped colorless jump ahead. And then at 4th, we got Water with 19 decks. And I think without the jump in colorless decks, Water does have a pretty strong matchup into Psychic and Fighting. And so it's no surprise that people might have been trying to play anti-meta with Water to go into the Psychic and Fighting decks, as in the last 3K we did see 1 Hydro Pump list make top 8. Finally, for the remaining types, it's good to caveat that for this tournament, Full Grip Games had given the top player for each type a special promo, and so that incentivized people to play these less popular types in an effort to obtain these special promos. So we got 8 Dragon players, 6 Darkness, and then 5 Grass, 4 Fire, 3 Metal, and that yellow sliver is 2 Lightning. It's also important to note that with these promos, there was no one playing Fairy. All it took was 1 player, and they could have gotten the Mr. Mime promo, but what can you do? So I'm going to talk through the top lists for each of the types. As mentioned, they all got a promo, so I think that's worth calling out, even if they did have a negative record. So starting off with Lightning, we have Andrew Carlson here with a 3-4 record. So Andrew Carlson was playing Lightning Spread with the Joltik as a way to power up your Electabuzz. One thing to call out is Mr. Carlson played the 60 HP basics in the 60 HP Blitzel and 60 HP Mareep. And with 8 dragons in the field, I'm not sure if he got punished for it by the Raging Bolt, but it definitely is a choice to be playing the 60 HP basics. Outside of that, the list is pretty similar to Z-Man's list, and one thing I like is that he plays 3 basic grass energy. I've seen people try to play Joltik with just 2, and it just seems very greedy, and especially when in a deck like this, you really rely on the Joltik attack of Jolting Charge to accelerate 2 grass and 2 lightning energy. However, I think what may have led to the negative record is just the tempo of Jolting Charge on Joltik. When you're using Jolting Charge, you're spending a turn to accelerate energy onto Electabuzz, so you can hopefully evolve into Electivire and proactively use High Voltage Current. I think a key part in this current meta is the aggressive decks, Colorless and Fighting. They both have 3 Gust cards, so if you are spending a turn to power up your Electabuzz, if your opponent gusts up the Electabuzz that you put your energy on and KOs it, you just lost a turn and a prize, and you don't really have a good way to come back from that. Meanwhile, I do think Lightning has a good matchup in the field with the decrease in Fighting. I think Lightning has a pretty good matchup into Colorless if you're built for it, and then can go even with Psychic. It's worth noting the other Lightning deck also went 3-4, and they were playing the Bombs variant. They did cut the basic Lightning energy for a Lekid and another one for the Voltaic energy. I disagree with the basic lightning energy cut for Elekid. I think you either play Elekid or Ethan's Pichu, but not both. Just given the loss in tempo of giving up 2 free prizes is a little hard to come back from. However, I am surprised at the 3-4 record given how well it could have played into the field. Moving on, we got Metal here. So for Metal, the top placing list was by Jacob Skeens, who went 3 and 4. This Metal list, I think, is a little bit of Arch Nemesis, which was created by Tricky Jim, and then is also reminiscent of from Novak's list, where there is no Metang. He just plays Metal Energy. But there's also no Philippe, which is also quite interesting. Instead, it looks like Mr. Skeens relies on Wishful Baton to hold these energy on the board once he gets them attached. He also plays Peony, which I think is really interesting, as you can use Peony to empty your hand, and you can find your Rev Room and energy to get a fresh 6 cards. And then he also plays Research with that, so you can dig pretty far in this deck. However, I can't say I'm surprised with the 3 and 4 record. I think there are some flaws to his deck, as mentioned. With no Metang, I would expect more special energy and the Philippe. But without either of them, it seems like you would have a hard time getting energy on the board, as you're solely relying on Bronzong and Raihan and Metal Saucer. And then Lost City was also cut. So I think Metal does need the help to remove the threats to your Archaludon with the coded attack. And without the Lost City, they can recur those threats and your Archaludon might not be as effective. Moving on, we got Fire. And Fire here, run by Thomas Headley Jr., went 4 and 3. And so I know a lot of people talk about Fire as one of the worst types. And Fire went through a positive record. Going 4 and 3, I think it's very impressive, and congrats to Thomas. The list he ran looks like it's very similar to Captain Kev on Discord, where you run the Charizard and Emboar as your stage 2 Pokemon. And then your sole draw, it comes from Salazzle, as you play 9 Fire Energy, and then you try to attack with Heatmore, Entei, and Chiyu, and can use Torchic with your 3 TMs. You got TM Crisis Punch to potentially get 2 prizes. TM Evo can potentially Evo directly into your stage 2 Pokemon like Charizard and Emboar. And then TM Turbo Energize can get 4 energy from your deck with Torchic's Omega Barrage, an ancient trait. Overall, I think it's a solid list. However, I think the issue with Fire is no one has been able to find a way to play it in a way that really takes advantage of what's good about Fire. And that's just a big question I think I don't even know the answer for. I think everyone's trying to build Fire the way they build other types, and Fire just might be different, and someone needs to come with a new innovative idea to play Fire and play it effectively. I think one card I've been thinking of that I don't see as often anymore is the Moltres, that has, I believe, 120 HP, and if it has any damage counters on it for 1 fire, it can do 20 plus 9 plus 70. And so what's interesting about that Moltres is it's not only very aggressive early if you have Rainbow Energy or a way to proc it with Magma Basin, but it's also a deterrent to all these aggressive decks right now, like Fan Rotom, Soul Rock. If you have it in the active and they punch you for 70, now for a single Fire Energy, you can return KO the Fan Rotom. With the Muscle Band, you can return KO the Soul Rock. And so with a deck like this, it seems like you don't have a lot of draw if your Salazzle gets prized, or if any of your Pokemon lines for Charizard or Emboar gets prized. You have pretty small Pokemon. You don't really want Heatmore or Entei inactive, as they have 2 retreat, and so even if you have them to tank and attack, they're just going to get hit again and get KO'd. And so overall, there are a lot of flaws I can see from this deck and what the meta would be able to take advantage of. But congrats overall to Thomas. I think having a positive record with fire is definitely nothing to be ashamed of. Moving on for grass, we have Luna Dunham, who piloted this Terra Plume deck to a 4-3 finish. Ethan Whitney had piloted a similar deck to third place at the Chaos Rising 3K. And so the only change between his list and Luna's list is Luna has opted to play Rescue Scarf over Stealthy Hood. And I think that's a very interesting change and a very smart change given none of the Psychic decks we're seeing play Wobbuffet. And Dark has not been playing too much Galarian Wheezing. So Rescue Scarf instead gives you another way to recur your Pokemon as recovery, because when you have item lock set up with Vileplume, you're solely relying on Lana's aid to get Pokemon back. And so Rescue Scarf just provides another avenue to get your Pokemon back if they do get knocked out. Another thing I want to call out for grass is I think a lot of grass will see this kind of core of you have Torterra with the Sundrenched Shell, Grottle, and Roserade, and then these stadiums. And I think one of the strengths of grass is having all these stadiums and Pokemon work well together. Turffield can find your Grottle, and your Grottle can find another grass Pokemon. Forest of Vitality lets you play aggressively, so you can aggressively evolve your Pokemon. As early as turn 2, you can get your Vileplume and Torterra out and aggressively start attacking. Or you can go a little control route where you have the Executor and the Vileplume and kind of play slower and lock your opponent. So overall, congrats on Luna for the positive record of 4-3 and having the best placing grass deck. Moving on, we're going into Dark. We got Seth Heitman here with a 4-3 record. I think Dark here, he plays the Chi-Yu from Pitch Black and has Frozen City to synergize with it, where he's able to aggressively get 2 damage counters by attaching a Dark Energy to Chi-Yu and being able to attack for 110 with a Whirling Envy attack. In addition, Seth has played Galarian Wheezing, which was probably a very good play into the weekend. As mentioned earlier, people probably were not expecting an ability lock. In addition, with the rise in popularity of Colorless and the winning list not playing Escape Rope, Galarian Wheezing had the potential to sit in the active and actively disrupt your opponent while you can set up your board. One interesting card I really like in this deck is Rescue Carrier. Rescue Carrier lets you put 2 Pokemon, each with 90 or less HP from your discard pile into your hand. And if you look at this deck, you have a lot of impactful options. You have the Sneasel and Weavile line, which are both under 90 HP. And then you also have Spiritomb and Chi-Yu, which can be aggressive in attacking and will probably get knocked out easily, but you can recover them with Rescue Carrier, and that gives you 2 more attackers that you can recur in the mid game to take 2 more prizes. In addition, he's able to fit in Fighting Fury Belt, which is probably very strong with the Chi-Yu, as now you can hit 120, which is a very nice baseline. And the extra HP is beneficial as you are damaging your Chi-Yu, and its base 90 HP is already pretty low, and damaging it down to 70 means you're in range for Fan Rotom and Solrock. But Fighting Fury Belt solves that by giving you additional 40 HP. Moving along, we're going into Dragons, and the top placing Dragons list was piloted by Eric Worcester for a 5-2 finish. And so 5-2 was right below that top 8 mark. Everyone who finished 5-2 could have, if they were playing at 5-1, could have gone 6-1, and 6-1 made cut. So definitely a 5-2 finish is very impressive. And Eric Worcester played the Dwagons deck, played mostly by the Full Grip Games locals and created by them. The changes in his deck are that he cut Fire to add Fighting and Blend, and he also cut Reshiram with the decrease in Fire Energy. I find it interesting that Reshiram was cut given it has a very good synergy with the Jet Cruise Dragon Knight. However, I do see the thought process of maybe focusing more on Raging Bull and having that additional fighting energy. So when you Crispin, if you prize one fighting, you still have the other option. And Blend gives you not only the fighting and lightning, but also the water, which is helpful for Dragon Knight and Garchomp. Overall, congrats on the finish. Very impressive. There isn't anything too new about this list, but it's going to be interesting seeing how this competes against the rise in popularity of Colorless. With Dragon, there's not a lot of ways to come back, and Colorless wants to aggressively take knockouts. You do have big basics that can eat the Fan Rotom early, but if you fall behind too quickly, it's a little harder to come back. Moving along, we have Water. And so Water was piloted by Evan Wicklund, known as Evan Wiki on Discord from the Turbo Blaze team, finishing 5-2. And so Evan was playing the Milo Pump deck that the team Turbo Blaze had created about a year ago from now. And so the changes from the original Milo Pump deck they had was they cut Octillery for Swampert, and to make space for the Swampert, they also cut Evo Soda. They also cut N for Lieutenant Surge's strategy, a Rezu for Dawn, and an Air Balloon for Surfing Beach. I really like the latter two changes that were made. Dawn seems very impactful in Water, especially a deck like this where you do have two Stage 2 lines and very impactful Stage 1 lines. Dawn giving you either Drizzar or Inteleon for shady dealings can get anything you want from your deck essentially for the trainer end. And then Surfing Beach allows you to pivot, which synergizes well with the Ice Stance on Frostmoth, but also gives you a stadium bump for Parallel City. I think stadiums are very important in GLC, and usually I want to see 3 or 4 stadiums in most decks, especially if you are weak to Parallel City, because Parallel City is a very impactful stadium, same as Silent Lab, and having impactful stadiums yourself that can bump it and benefit you are something I think that's worth considering. In addition, I want to call out that this deck played Professor's Letter, Capacious Bucket, and Earthen Vessel with 6 basic water energy. I know from Discord, a lot of the Turbo Blaze players were saying they had rough prizing with this deck, and I can see that with the lack of redundancy outside of the energy search that I just talked about. It looks like the goal here is you're recurring a lot of these powerful cards, but you only run one of them because Milotic's Sparkling Ripples ability can get you anything you want. And I think this came at a cost where maybe Earthen Vessel could be cut for a counter energy. Counter energy, I think, could be, although not as strong as Reversal Energy, still another out that you can power up your Pokemon. You can Raihan and counter energy Wishy Washy against aggressive decks. If you've already pre-attached to Whalmer or Wailord, Raihan counter energy is also powerful in that case. In addition, obviously we have Frostmoth, so I think the point of having counter energy reversal means you don't need to rely on as many water energy to accelerate. In addition, I found it interesting that the deck slotted in Lieutenant Surge's strategy, but doesn't seem like there's a lot of impactful supporters. I think the biggest impact that you would have here is Hexiono or Teammates Twice or Malo Lana Hex. But I think what I mentioned at first, Hex Maniac Iono, that combo is played with a lot of the top decks right now without Lieutenant Surge. You can play Hex Maniac Reset Stamp, and that saves you from playing another supporter in your deck. And you can do a similar thing where with Reset Stamp, you can recover that with Milotic, and you can still Hex Reset Stamp. I do know Shady Dealings can set up your combos where you can search out, for example, Lieutenant Surge's strategy and Teammates. But I do think it is worth considering how you want to set up the supporter lineup for this deck. It is also really cool that they do play the new Wilmer from Pitch Black, so they did add one of the new cards in their deck. Moving along, we're moving into the top 8, and so we haven't touched on these 3 types: fighting, psychic, and colorless. These, as we mentioned earlier, are the top 3 in popularity, and so it might not come as a surprise that people were playing the decks they thought were the best, and these ultimately shaped up to be the decks that made up the top 8. We had 4 colorless, as you can see, making up 50% of the top 8, 1 fighting, and then 3 psychic. So we're going to start off with fighting. So fighting was piloted by Olivier NG, who went 6-2, finishing at top 8. And he piloted a RDT deck. In Olivier's deck, it's quite similar to what Ben Peacock ran to go 6th in the previous 3K. So Ben Peacock, instead of what Ben Peacock had, Olivier ran Field Blower for Lost Vacuum, Clara was replaced for Boss's Orders, Compressor was replaced for Marnie, and Pokepad for Ultra Ball. I think one of the more interesting cards that confused me is the replacement of Pokepad for Ultra Ball. There isn't Ball Guy in the deck, and so Ultra Ball would require you to discard 2. I don't see too many synergies for this card too, but I'm curious to see why Olivier thought Ultra Ball might have been better. Another thing to call out is Olivier added in Boss's Orders. As alluded to earlier, the aggressive decks are able to play 3 Gust effects. In colorless, you have Boss, Guzma, and Hops Double. And so adding in Boss's Orders for this RDT deck gives you Boss, Guzma, and Hariyama. Another addition I do enjoy seeing in this deck is Canceling Cologne, and this goes in line with Triple Gust ability. Ben Peacock had it in his 3K top 8 list for Chaos Rising, but Canceling Cologne is really interesting because it provides an out to Okidogi. It also provides an out to ability lock inactive like Galarian Weezing and Lava Fett. But if you're gusting up your opponent's bench barrier, you can also Canceling Cologne and Ground Crasher with Ting Lu. So there's a lot of use cases you can get out of Canceling Cologne. And so I think it provides a very meaningful tech that people should consider over Enhanced Hammer. Moving along, we got Psychic. And so we have Brooke English, who finished 7-2 in the top 4, and then Brooke's friend Winter, who had the same 60 go top 8. Brooke went 2nd in the previous 3K for Chaos Rising, and so the difference between her list in the Chaos Rising 3K and this one was she just cut Mystery Energy for Floatstone. And so the list was pretty solid before. It's hard to deny the success that Brooke has had over the years in these 3Ks, consistently top 8ing. And it's just a solid list. There's not much more I have to say. It's just your Monkey Tina list with Deoxys. So wanted to move on. I think this one's one of the more exciting Psychic lists that probably people are talking about, and this was piloted by Mike Gibbs for an 8-2 finish for a 2nd place finished. So this was the top placing Psychic list. Couple things to note that you may jump out when you immediately see it. This list is the Gardevoir. Instead of playing Gallade with the Buddy Catch ability, it has the Next Destiny's Gardevoir with Psychic Mirage, which doubles your Psychic Energy. There's the Alakazam line that gives you card draw. And then when you look a little deeper, there is no Via Seeker, Guzma, or tool removal. And so the cool thing is that Mike Gibbs actually gave his thoughts on why he does not play Via Seeker and Guzma. On Discord, he had mentioned that he wants to focus on building Deoxys, as Deoxys is so strong. And he expects to force Silent Lab when he attacks, so he doesn't expect to go Guzma Deoxys. In addition, he found Escape Rope to be essentially like Boss, where when you play Parallel City and Escape Rope, you can get a meaningful target. And with Mike's expertise and skill in the game, along with the longevity that he's played this game, he alluded this combo to Giant Stump and Warp Point in the 2000s format, where Giant Stump also limited your opponent's bench down to 3, and Warp Point is just the same card as the Scapegoat. Another card to call out in this list is Dawn. I know we talked about it in the Milo Pump deck, but in this deck it serves a similar purpose where it gets you a stage 1 and stage 2 in basic, and you have an effective stage 1 and stage 2 Pokemon where it doesn't feel dead because you're still drawing cards from your supporter. And in this case, you have a lot of meaningful stage 1 Pokemon that can accelerate energy, and then also Kadabra and Alakazam give you that draw option. I think Kadabra and Alakazam succeeded a lot in the past weekend due to the lack of hand disruption. If it was reset stamp, if you have this early game, being disrupted to 6 is still fine because powerful hand still hits for 120. And then even later in the game, you probably have already used your Alakazam. If you want to play it, you'll evolve to draw cards. And Alakazam gave Mike Gibbs an option to be aggressive early. I think in the set review I've talked about for Psychic, Psychic usually is a little slower in the early game. You usually have set up for your stage 1s like Xatu and Malamar before you can get your Giratina online, and a Blacephalon obviously has to wait for your opponent to take 3 prizes. But with Alakazam, you can aggressively evolve into it, and you can start putting pressure on your opponent. With the omission of Via Seeker and Guzma, I think it did cost him quite heavily in the finals of the 3K. In addition, he also played Silent Lab, which is helpful into colorless, but I think with the omission of Guzma and Via Seeker, he was unable to move around the Hops Cramorant on the 3 prize turn, which typically you want to do because once you move around the Hops Cramorant and KO something else when you have 3 prizes left, then their Hops Cramorant and energy attached become useless because once you're 2 or less, the Hops Cramorant attack doesn't do anything. In addition, when you're powering up Deoxys, he would be unable to move around the Toucannon from Pitch Black because Toucannon at 150 HP can take a hit and it forces him to snipe something else, and he can only take 1 prize instead of the 2 that I think he would look forward to match up in the prize trade, as a lot of times he was falling behind early due to colorless's aggression. Moving on, we got colorless as the last type. And so I wanted to start off talking through Sebastian Lashmit's deck, going 7-2 and finishing top 8. Sebastian played Ursaluna Control. And so this isn't the first time we've seen Ursaluna Control at a 3K. In Chaos Rising, we saw Trevor Passmore finish 20th place. But he had a slightly different list compared to Sebastian. So a couple of the differences I noticed were there is no Persian line that Trevor played. Sebastian had cut the Dunsparce. And overall, Sebastian focused more on a supporter-heavy lineup and a focus on getting to the bottom of the deck as fast as possible. You can see this through Battle Compressor, which is not seen previously. There is no Beach, as I think you have the Gormandai Snorlax instead to draw up. And then he also plays Picnic Basket as a tech against spread decks, which was not seen in Trevor's deck. Another interesting card I saw is Mallow as a supporter. So Sebastian played Mallow, and this could combo really well as we see in the Turbo colorless decks, but you can combo with Cinccino, you could also combo with Pokestop, and you can get what you need very quickly, because I think a big part of the Ursaluna control deck is you want your cards in the discard so Ursaluna can bring it back with the Peat Hunt attack where you can put 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. And so if you are unable to go through your deck and get those cards out, then your Peat Hunt cannot save you from whatever out you're looking for from what your opponent has. And so Mallow allows you to get that and get it effectively into your discard. Moving along, we got Jesse Parker finishing first at a 9-1 record. And so he played Toucanon, and I know on my set review I said Toucanon was not optimal for colorless decks, and I would still double down on that. I understand that Jesse Parker finished first and performed really well with this colorless deck, but I think this result could have still occurred with a optimized turbo colorless deck. Toucanon was used as another attacker essentially, where you can use one energy and hit hard. In this list, we just see a bunch of colorless energies, and so with 10 special energies, you're able to have ignition and triple acceleration combo with your Greedent and your Hops double, and then you have all these other energies you can combo with Toucanon. But ultimately, I think what's going on here is with colorless, it has that good matchup into Psychic, as talked about earlier. And so Jesse really took advantage of the ability to pressure Psychic early and quickly. With that, you also had the aggressive option to gust up their support Pokemon and Lost City them, which a lot of decks aren't able to do, but colorless just does not really care if their attacker gets lost zone because you have so many of them. I do want to mention, in my opinion, I think Snorlax, the Thumping Snorlax, could have been better and served the same purpose as the Toucanon, as Hops Snorlax with Postwick and Hops Choice Band can get you to the same number that requires you to KO Wailord. Toucanon caps out at 260. Hops Snorlax can get to 260. I know, although a little hard, but with powerful energy, Hops Choice Band, and Postwick. So I think if you were to play the Thumping Snorlax, you have more deck options to tech. And so what we see in this deck is there's no escape rope. And so you would have options there. And there's no real tech for fighting. I know Toucanon helps in the fighting matchup, but I think it would have been nice to see like E-Hammer or Cologne. And a lot of people are talking now about how Wobbuffet could be effective into colorless because there's no respect for it in here, right? You have Lysander and Guzma, but past that, you don't really have a solid way to get past a Wobbuffet that's sitting active and shutting off all of your draw. But yeah, overall, this deck is solid. I'd say it's turbo colorless. You can't really go wrong with the base of it. Also, within the top 8, there was 2 other lists that played very similar. I think the difference was they added in Hilda instead of Winona. And honestly, it kind of shows that what people thought was the best with Psychic could be overcome with something, although not entirely new. The concept of turbo colorless has always existed, but it's cool to see the new cards like Toucanon from Pitch Black be used in the winning list. So going on for closing thoughts, just want to talk through kind of what was from Pitch Black and used in this 3K. So obviously we got Toucanon from the winning list as we've talked ad nauseum about. We've got some of the cards we'd expect: Voltaic Lightning Energy in the Lightning deck, Wailmer as being a substitute for the old Wailmer in the Milo Pump, the best placing Dark List playing the new Chi-Yu. I think also we got some interesting cards like Missy's Energy, which I did not expect to be played. Still not convinced about it, but it's worth calling out that Consiglio piloted Dragon to a 44th place with Missy's Energy, having the combo to Missy's Energy, Water Energies to your Kyurem, so he could attack with Kyurem the following turn. And so, although it's a very powerful combo if you are able to pull it off, I think we've talked about earlier about with Lightning and the Jolting Charge onto Electabuzz, the most aggressive decks right now, like Fighting and Colorless, you're playing 3 Gust options. And if they're able to Gust up this Pokemon that you spent an entire turn trying to build up and got 0 value out of, you are very far behind and very screwed. And so that's why I don't foresee Misuse Energy still being played. But it was really cool to see someone innovate with it and try it out in a deck. Another thing I want to call out was Gladian's Decisive Battle. There was only one lone player that played this card along with the new Silvally. Novak played it. And so I think a symptom of this was Gladian's Decisive Battle isn't very easy to just slot into any deck. You have to build your deck around it. But I think the effect of it is very strong. Having an additional 80 damage is very meaningful, and there will probably be a gimmick deck or a deck that can really take advantage of that additional damage. And so it just might take more time for it to happen. And so, although there's only one player that played it, I hope people still start experimenting with these new cards from Pitch Black, as there is so much that can be tested and innovated upon. GLC really is a deck builder's dream. I think that's exemplified from what we saw in this 3K, with people playing all these different types, with the additional incentive of having the best being the best player within the type and getting that extra promo. It's very cool just to see everyone innovate. You got the Psychic deck with Mike Gibbs playing Alakazam, Toucannon being played in colorless, and ultimately winning with colorless, as I think a lot of people were expecting another repeat from Psychic. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for anyone that's been listening so far through this whole video. I'll try to have weekly uploads, and let me know if there's anything you have on your mind that you want to hear from me. I'm happy to talk through my thoughts about GLC. I just love this format and just deck building in general. So it was a treat to see the results of this 3K and what may come of the GLC meta going forward. Thank you.